Let's talk about mental health. Let's talk about the lack of accesses to resources. I feel like when I source out guests and then interview them, and then when I listen back to the interview when I'm editing, it's almost like we can't talk enough about mental health and disability because both are so intrinsically woven into one another. And if any of you are interested in the stats like I am, the top episodes for this podcast deal with life stories, mental health, and sex. So take from that what you will, but it's clear to me that there is a giant information gap. So for this episode of Have the Nerve, I'm bringing on Geraldine Watts.
Hi, my name is Geraldine Watts, or Jerry, easier. I have T10 to T12 incomplete paraplegia for 6 years. I'm a mum. I've got 2 children, 10 years and 18 years, and I'm happily married 25 years this year.
We're going to talk to her about the journey with mental health and mental wellbeing, the barriers when accessing health services living in a rural and regional community in Australia, and how she turned from feeling shy and unable to confront things to being an outspoken advocate for people with disabilities in her regional community that she lives in.
So as I said before, I have T10 to T12 incomplete paraplegia. It was not really a traumatic injury. It was more like a build-up. When I was about 20, a very close proximity, I had a horse riding accident and a car accident together, and generally we think maybe that was the start of my trouble with my disc, but it wasn't until 2016 my disc disintegrated at T12 in that general area, and I suffered a conus injury, so whereby my own spine disintegrated at that point, and I had to rebuild the disc. So I have a metal rod and 2 screws to keep it basic. And so I lost, basically, it's the start, everything below my waist at that level. And when I woke up from surgery, not everything had come back. And I basically had no bladder, no bowel. And what I have got back now is what I'm left with. So I have to self-cath and all the wonderful packages that come along with all of that.
We talk about in detail in a lot of our podcasts, and I keep reiterating, and it keeps coming up like in every single episode because it's so important to so many people, and it doesn't really matter how you're getting that spinal cord injury. It just becomes a very repeated subject.
That's right. It is a pattern. It is a pattern that you see across the board, and it's something that all persons with disability with spinal cord injury have an issue with.
Just to backtrack a little bit, you did say that you had a horse riding accident and a car accident around the same time. They weren't on the same day, were they?
No, they were within about 12 months of each other. So it was as I was 20, 21, around that area. So I had a horse, obviously. She was only a little Kravitz Arab pony, but she was a horse for me because I'm only short. And I basically fell off her backwards. I had a helmet, but it wasn't enough to stop the insult to my spine at that time. And there's no hard and fast rule with it. It's just my spine obviously just suffered that injury at the time. The car accident was I had a car come through a roundabout that shouldn't have and hit me square on, T-boned me. I was trapped in the car. I couldn't move. I had the whole side of it crushed in on my leg. So it wasn't a really high-speed accident either. So it just goes to show you, I mean, you can fall off a plank and suffer a spinal cord injury. It is what it is on the day, and mine just came back and got me later. So, yeah.
So how did you feel when you came out of that surgery and you've had all the screws and everything's kind of being rebuilt? And then you start to notice that there is a lack of function in certain areas. Go through what you were thinking about at the time when this was all happening.
At the time, when I woke up and just nothing was there, it was obviously very frightening, but everybody around me seemed to be very focused on standing up, walking again, which is fine, but I actually didn't understand really what was happening to me at the time. I didn't actually even know until really 2020 when I got re-diagnosed, because it was thought that it was cauda equina at the time, but it's actually my conus. So I didn't even realise that I actually had what was called a spinal cord injury. I just thought that I'd had surgery for a spinal issue and that it was now fixed and this is how I was. I didn't know all the implications of what spinal cord injury meant until recently, the last 2 years really. And that's when,
Really?
that's it. That's the amazing, frightening thing for me is I just didn't know. So all that time I could have been more focused on what I should have been getting, what I needed to get, and that's where I guess we'll talk later on about self-advocacy. I didn't know. I didn't know I had a spinal cord injury. I didn't know what that meant.
In 2020, when you were, when it all clicked, what was the moment where you're like, oh, this is happening now?
The day the lady actually came to re-diagnose me, she actually flew here from Sydney. She's actually from a spinal rehab unit background. And she re-diagnosed me just as part of everything moving forward. And she re-diagnosed T10 to T12 incomplete paraplegia. So literally in the last 2 years, I have been mega focused on what that means for me, what that picture looks like, and just to be the best version of myself I can be.
I mean, listeners won't know, but we did a few very, very short interviews about your journey with mental health and wellness. And so obviously that has become quite a primary focus for you, and I can only assume even more so over the past couple of years. Do you want to talk about where you were, where you were at, and then where you are now, what you're looking forward to?
Where I was at, so if we go right back to 6 years ago, just focused on walking again. Everything was about moving. I didn't have a lot of mobility. I was very isolated in a rural farming community. There wasn't a lot of help there. So my primary focus was just to be able to deal with the pain because after that first 6 months, there's a lot of chronic pain and a lot of mobility issues and just dealing with the new version of me and mainly moving. And then being very isolated, that's basically what my life consisted of. I've found mentally I became very much a hermit. I felt like I was stuck in my own little pattern and just getting by day to day. I didn't really feel like I was living as much as existing, which is a bit sad, but now I feel like I'm living. So the me now since 2020 has just been a gradual big build up to being the new version of me. And I think the most important thing for me is realising that there is a version of yourself that is well, that you can stay healthy and mentally well. And it's not just the whole rural thing of being isolated. It's people across the board with disabilities, with spinal cord injury, probably a lot of the time don't even realise that they can have periods of mental unwellness, and I didn't recognise that in myself. But having done some courses and things like that, I do talk passionately about Engage and WRAP program. So having a daily wellness tool, very important. And I didn't realise that you actually didn't need to have a clinical mental condition to be mentally unwell. That's something that I've learned in the last 2 years.
I'm just thinking, being in a rural community, it doesn't really matter where you are. You can have mental issues going on with your mental health. But what is the distinct difference for somebody living in a rural community, for example? Because I think when we were speaking earlier, you had mentioned that you used to live somewhere in Sydney and then you moved up to Queensland. So what are the distinct differences of, support and care that you feel like, what are the good, what are the bad, I guess, about living in that sort of rural community?
So I think the good, if we were focusing on the good, there's a lot of support and strength you can draw on from community people, from your friends, your family, local people. Sometimes it can work both ways. It can be good and bad. You can have the closeness, but you can also have the isolation. And the isolation is something that I found really affected my mental health. I really felt isolated. I felt like I was alone. I felt, even though I had family and friends, and you've got that good side, and I have a great supportive family. I'm very lucky. A lot of people don't, and that's something I'm learning more and more as I've been going through this whole journey, is that there are a lot of people that don't have that support, and so for them, I can't imagine what the picture looks like for them. In a rural community, having lived experience of that and having lived in a more regional sort of metropolitan area, even though it's still where I am now in Austerville is considered regional, there is close places, an hour and you're at specialists. Like my orthotist is only an hour away. Where I was, it was a 3-hour journey if you wanted specialist care. and that's not the return. So that's 3 hours, sometimes on very rough roads. I know a lot of people have that issue out that way. So I was about 3.5 hours inland, very, as I said, very regional, very rural. And a lot of the time services get cancelled while you're on the waiting list, and there's not enough specialist and GP care to replace that. So often there's that gap. And I did experience that. I had been on waiting lists for things, and often you're expected to be there or else. So it's a case of, like, I can remember when I had, I was supposed to see a urinary specialist, and because I was unwell and couldn't travel, that was it. It got cancelled, got never replaced. So these things happen, and the onus is on you to know what's good for you. And again, with the self-advocacy, if you don't know what you need and don't know what the best version of you is, you don't know how to find that. You don't know how to get the help.
If you're having a situation where a specialist is cancelling on you because of the distance, I think this podcast is listened to in 56 countries around the world, and I don't think people understand the distance of Australia and how far things are. They might in places like the United States, for example, Canada being one of them. But if you're living in a smaller country where you can travel to another country in a neighbouring part of Europe, and that could be 2 hours away, but you're somewhere else and somewhere else, and things are constantly busy. Being in a rural community where you are 3 hours away from care or any support, how are you meant to know? And I guess we are talking about self-advocacy, but also urology is not your skill set, Jerry. So how are you meant to know what's best for you when you don't know what anything is, because it's not your profession?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, looking back, and hindsight's a wonderful tool. It'd be good if we had it at the time, what we know in our future self, but I didn't. That's the whole point. I didn't. And there's a massive gap there. There's a big disparity in rural and metropolitan. And I know that there's like a lot of systems in place, like they've done a lot of filling the gaps, but there's no one often in rural areas to replace what's lost. And I think that there needs to be that rural and metropolitan infrastructure where they talk to each other. And I know that is happening. I see it. I've through my own self-advocacy journey and supporting myself, I see all the things in place. Like, there's a lot of things in place now that weren't going back 6 years ago, even looking at my own situation. But there needs to be more done. So, we need to find ways of incentives of filling those gaps, the medical staff, the GPs, the specialist incentives for them to be in those rural areas. I think one of the biggest things is they don't want to be there. There's nothing exciting for them to be there. There's not the pay that there is there. So, I can understand if I put myself in a specialist and GP's position, I'd want to be in metropolitan area too, because it is more fulfilling. So, yeah, I think there's that incentive needed, whether that's through like a mandated cycling of specialists where in order to practice you need, that's just an example off the top of my head, you need to do, say, 1 day a week or 1 day a fortnight where that gap is filled. I know that you can access specialist services. I was accessing them within an hour away, but it's minimal. It's very minimal. And you often don't know what you need, and that's the whole point. There needs to be that grassroots level of understanding right from when you have your injury, especially in the rural setting.
Do you find, or have you ever been a part of like telehealth kind of support services, and have you found them to be a good or a adequate replacement to face-to-face?
I have had telehealth now, and it's wonderful. It's almost like an angelic tool if it's used right. I like to say that because I have found that it's been very good for me, and I've spoken to some other people. If you can't get out, like having a spinal cord injury, often pain is not your friend. So that's one of the most disabling features of it is if you're having a really bad pain day, a bad chronic pain day, you can't get out. You physically just can't do it. Your strength isn't there. So having that telehealth service to fall back on where you can actually speak to the people that are your supporters, that are your carers, your allied health team, and they're right there at a telephone call. So I found that's a great service. And I think looking back, that would have been a wonderful tool to have back when I was out where I was.
There has been some talk about trying to cut down on the telehealth services, but when you're living 3 hours away from anything and you want to have access to a specialist, why wouldn't you want to choose a telehealth option to make your patients feel like they're even supported a little bit?
Yeah, it's an incredible tool. I've seen it work for so many people. I came across a lady in the doctor's surgery just last year who, again, it seems to be a pattern. She didn't realise she had a spinal cord injury either, and I actually was able to help her, which was lovely. And I actually suggested, telehealth. She went through the floods. So she was living in a caravan outside of Lismore and had been through the floods and had just had surgery for her quadricina. So she didn't even know what she had, what she needed. So I think telehealth for her, that's important. In my experience from where I was, I think access to information is the biggest barrier that people with disabilities face. Is just, you don't often know, if you don't know what you've got, you don't know what your needs are, and you're not... Self-advocacy isn't something that is comes naturally for a lot of people. I've had to learn it. It was something very unnatural for me. I'd always just plodded along, felt like everybody understood me. But I found there was this massive difference when I had what I now realise was the spinal cord injury. I had to relearn what the well version of me was, what I needed. So understanding your needs and that access to information is the most important.
Talk a little bit more about how you developed your self-advocacy. So now that you know that you have an SCI and finally all the pieces are coming together for you, what does self-advocacy mean for you? So
I think the first start of it was obviously getting re-diagnosed. Having a name for what you've got might sound really silly, but it's paramount. You have to know what you've got and what that is. So education is one of the biggest points for self-advocacy. Understanding your rights, so that's human rights, disability rights. I didn't realise there was so much in it until I'd gone down that. So the start of mine was accessing information. So understanding my condition, understanding what paraplegia was, what that meant for me, not just the symptoms of it, but actually the inner workings of it, what that looked like for me in my daily life. Then I could understand what I needed. And then I could start looking for people that could fulfill that need. And something that's really helped me along the way recently, and I will talk passionately about that, is the SCIA RAP program. So the Wellness Recovery tool. It's a daily plan. It's, if you don't have the resilience and the knowledge of what you need, you can't be the best version of yourself. So that's all part of self-advocacy, is understanding. It's empowering. It's empowerment, and that's what it is. That's what self-advocacy is. It's empowering.
So what's your toolbox look like?
So my toolbox looks like, the first step was obviously accessing education, learning my condition, then reaching out to people in my local community and acquiring the best healthcare that I could, the best team that I could for me. That meant starting all over again. Finding the right physio, finding the right physio, finding the right exercise physiologist, and recently switching GPs. So I've just recently changed GPs. I've gone to shared care between someone that I had and someone that I'm moving over to, and then it'll eventually, because I found that I now recognise that they weren't what I needed. So having someone that can speak for you if you can't as well. So advocacy is about your support team, about having people around you that are positive, that know you, know the best version of you and what you want to be, what your desires are, what your needs are, and having that support team around you.
Yeah, and your point about GPs is super interesting, because about 10 years ago, I switched general practitioners to somebody who was younger, did not know a lot about SCI, but he was very passionate to know about more and more about SCI. And then recently he was filling out a medical fitness form for my driving. And he's like, how long have we known each other, Susan? I'm like, it's our 10-year anniversary this year.
Wow,
and he's like, oh my
wow.
gosh. Anyway, it's interesting that you say that, because I guess people will fall in line with wanting to just go to a general practitioner because without really vetting them. Because a lot of it is it's almost like a job interview. You're interviewing them to make sure that they're going to be the best person for you, as well as them trying to help you. But if they're not the best person for you, you need to go with your gut and go somewhere else, right?
Yeah, and that's hard. It is really, really hard to self-advocate in that area, because we, like you said, we do fall into that pattern. And it's that whole thing of what you just said just now about vetting them, about that's where self-advocacy comes in, knowing what you need, knowing what the best version of you is. That's how you can find the services that you need. So when I approached it, it's knowing what you need first and being able to speak up for yourself. It's very hard when you come from a background and not being able to do that. Not that you've been a doormat where people are just walking over you, but sometimes it's just being able to speak up for that first time, having that inner voice to say, hang on, I'm not getting what I need here. I'm not moving forward. I'm not getting what's right for me. I'm not feeling well and I need help.
And this conversation does lead me into, previous to this conversation, actually, I was thinking about how it takes certain personality types to want to make the next step for them to actually go and self-advocate and try and find services and supports that are best for them. But for you to go from a situation where, like you said, you weren't a doormat, but you were probably a bit, and I'm just making an assumption now, but maybe you felt like you didn't feel like you had to. It would all kind of fall into place eventually. Maybe, other people will probably do that job for you instead of you doing it for yourself. Am I going down the right track at all?
That's right. No, that's right. Yep.
But what was the turning, I know that we had talked about SCI and finally putting a name to the disability that you had, but let's talk about how you, trying to be the best self that you can be, went from the personality of somebody else will do it to I'm going to do it.
So looking back, I think the turning point was joining the NDIS, and the biggest turning point was actually skier, which is, that might seem a little bit biased.
No, it's fine.
But that wasn't, that is a turning point for me, was actually joining skier, getting my wonderful support coordinator. Am I allowed to say her name?
Of course you are. Let's do it.
The wonderful Maggie May. So Maggie May recognises in me that I can be a good self-advocate now. When I started with her, I don't know that I was, and she taught me how to use my NDIS program properly. When I actually had a long struggle getting on the NDIS, not because my condition didn't make it possible, it's because I didn't know what I was doing. So, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just basically floundering, flapping around in the dark. I had a very unsupportive GP who had no idea what they were doing, and they were a fill-in GP, again, with the whole rural, often it's not you. I think I saw 4 or 5 fill-in GPs in the space of 6 months. And that for you, that's
because you have to keep repeating your disability over and over.
It's like a minefield. So when I started, and I only found out about the NDIS as a fluke, because actually I was seeing a physio, one of the rare occasions where you could manage to get a physio. I was seeing a physio through my GP, who was, at that stage, I'd seen a few months, so that was pretty long term for GP there. And she said, have you heard about NDIS? And I didn't know. So that started the ball rolling. I went looking. So again, having that home internet or a connection, that's the big thing too. So for me, I already had all that. I just didn't know that I needed it, didn't know what was available. So yeah, for me, my turning point was definitely skier. That started me down the road of, okay, this is what I need, this is what I have. And again, getting re-diagnosed, having a name for it. And then it was just a slow path. And going back, I can see those definite points where I made changes, but they happened slowly and they happened one after the other, like finding the care I needed. So I thought, okay, what do I need? I realised that I didn't have a good mobility in my left leg. I knew that, but I didn't realise there were things out there that I could do for that. In hospital, I remembered them talking about a brace, a whole leg brace. I remember my husband buying a special pair of expensive shoes for it at the time, but my physio broke his leg. And ended up in a moonbird. I know, so amazing. And so physio dropped off to less than 10 minutes every other day. And this is for someone with a spinal cord injury. So for me, it was about stepping down and finding the best care I could. And so I suppose that's a bit of a thing. You know, you wouldn't hear about that real often. But I didn't know I had a spinal cord injury. So to step down meant getting better care, which sounds crazy, but it's because there wasn't enough physio care at that time for me in that space, and my husband recognised that I needed more, so he was my advocate. My husband was my advocate, but a lot of people don't have that. They might be on their own, they might have more special needs and don't realise that what they need. So yeah, for me it was making all those changes since joining SCIA and having the NDIS, and I've done things like Physical Disabilities Council Australia. I've done some, New South Wales, not Australia.
Me too.
Yeah,
me too.
I've done things like that. I've done self-advocacy courses with SCIA. So I've done the Engage group where you meet other people who have a spinal cord injury.
How important for you was it to meet other people with similar disabilities to your own? I say that because I also come from a regional community. And when I moved down to Sydney, and I mean, we're talking about SCIA a lot now in this conversation, but it wasn't until I had actually started working for SCIA and then met all these people with similar disabilities. I thought that a few things that I was experiencing, I was the only one and I could recover from. So for me, when you talk about pain, I get pains all up my arms and then down my back. And it was only very much tied to the weather. And it had been going on since I was 15, and I had no idea what that was. And I didn't understand that there was neuropathic pain. I didn't know what that meant.
No, me neither.
Like, for me, I was only diagnosed formally with my SCI when I was 27, and I've had it for my whole life. So, you know, incredible. And that was only when I moved down from a regional community into the metropolitan area.
Yeah.
So again,
exactly.
Again, this highlights a real specific gap in information, and also just an inability to, you can't diagnose yourself.
No.
No. You know, and if you're having to re-explain your disability to people who don't really have the knowledge of what it is that you're trying to explain, it doesn't help either.
Yes. So access to information again. So, I mean, we should be able to be in a rural area and live the way we want to live and have that, I keep saying grassroots level, but that's what it is. Have that. I'd love to see Australia-wide a package that's given to people in hospital. I don't know what that looks like. Maybe it's just my fantasy, where there's this package given to people. Like when I joined SCIA, I was given a package by my support coordinator, and I actually used that again more recently. I didn't realise there was a thing called Neuromoves until I started doing peer support, and I actually learnt from other people. I met a lovely fellow named Daryl, I think he was Sequad. I'm not sure. Yeah. And he... Darren, that's it, Darren, yeah. And he actually taught me a lot. So knowing people that have the same condition, just slightly different to you, lived it. Like, I didn't realise that there was a difference in different types of spinal cord injury either. I've really learned a lot in the last 2 years.
What are some of the, what do you mean by you didn't realise there was a difference? Tell me some huge things that you discovered. I mean, and I say this, things like the NDIS, for example, the fact that you didn't even know the NDIS existed is not an unusual story that I have heard. But it is shocking that we don't have access to that information to begin with.
That's right.
Even though I talk about it at length for a lot of times on this podcast, but there are people out there who don't even know that it exists.
So I've learned a lot about personal journeys, about how different people with different lifestyles and different personalities deal with their spinal cord injury. I've learned a lot about the similarities as well. There is a pattern. It doesn't look the same for everybody with a spinal cord injury, but there is a pattern there. We all deal with chronic pain in different stages, and there's different types of pain. That's something I learned too. I didn't know there were different types of pain. There's neuropathic pain, there's nociceptive pain, there's pain that you have at night, which can be neuropathic, but there can be musculoskeletal pain. There's all different types of pain. And then I've learned there's different ways we deal with mobility issues. There's different ways that you have with bladder issues, with bowel issues. There's so much different, but there's also so much the same. So there's a pattern. I've also learned that there are different help out there, different ways that we can manage things that I've learned so much about suprapubic catheters and indwelling catheters, things I just always knew about one way and one thing needs to fit everybody. And now I've learned, no, it doesn't have to be that way. There's so many different things you can do for yourself. There's so much different AT out there, so assistive technology that can help you in your day-to-day life. And that's something right from when I started my self-advocacy journey, learning about me, learning about how I needed to deal with my spinal cord injury, with my journey. That's why I was saying about before about the package. I'd love to see that for everybody, because if you know what you need, then you can make the start in getting that help. So it wasn't till about 18 months ago, I think now, I saw a wonderful, who travelled quite a long distance, a wonderful exercise physiologist who said, hang on, you need some AT here. You've got foot drop, you've got this going on, you've got mobility issues. You could be a better person if you had some AT. And I said, well, what do I need? He said, well, you need this thing called a KFO. And so I started going down the path again of getting some assistive technology. And now I'm at this doorstep where I'm getting a really amazing piece of technology called a C-brace, which I'm extremely passionate about and not a lot of people know about. So I'm actually only the third person from a Queensland.
What's a C-brace?
A C-brace is, good question, a microprocessor brace. It's hydraulically controlled, so it's digital. So it actually has a lithium battery, very much like a wheelchair.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so it's like an exoskeleton type of thing. So it goes over your leg, fits on your leg, fits you snug like a glove. And they cast your whole leg. I've just been through the casting process.
Is it up to the hip?
Yes. The trial one I tried was amazing and weird and scary and wonderful all in one big package. It was the first time I'd ever been able to actually sit down without jolting myself down and feeling like my hip was being jolted. And I remember just sitting there nearly having tears in my eyes because I actually could feel it kick in. You can feel the hydraulics kick in and catch you like a little hand. Yeah, it's amazing.
What are your thoughts on people with the lack of information being unable to access that sort of technology, but just because you happened upon somebody who was like, well, you actually need something that will help improve your life, that would never have happened in a metropolitan community, but it happened because you were further away. What are your thoughts?
Again, I'd just love to see that grass level information coming through. I mean, I don't want us to be with spinal cord injury still in this place in 10 years' time. This is why we need systemic advocacy. So, from my understanding, if you've got the toolkit at the start, your outcome, your wellness is going to be a lot better. Like, I look back now and I think, wow, it really is so hit and miss. It really is so hit and miss. Like, if I hadn't gone looking for what I needed and didn't know what I needed and come across that one person who knew I needed something. Like, I've been to other physios who've said, but you walk okay considering what you've got, but I can't walk far. I can't walk well. So I can walk without technology at all, but that walking's not a good walk. So I've learned, because I haven't had that brace from the start, I've learned a really bad gait. So as you know, having a gait, just having any form of gait when you're an incomplete injury is great because you're upright, but a bad gait is as bad as no gait. So when you're walking well and you don't have a disability, that looks very different to an incomplete paraplegic gait. So having the right AT for that and having the knowledge of what you need when you need it at the start is a massive difference for your outcome. So I know looking back, I'd be walking better and have had more life and more quality of life. But you can't get that back. I can't go backwards. I can only go forwards, and I know this is what I need. Like, I'm so excited for my future now. I'm so excited for being able to carry a small basket of clothes out of the washer and do things that I can't do. Like, I can't.
Jerry, I'm literally working on that now with my own EP.
yeah. So it's so hit and miss. Like, it's crazy. See, you're
it's crazy.
Yeah,
it's crazy that, like, it's very small things. Lifting a washing basket is literally a goal of mine to do it by bending up and bringing myself up without using myself to bring up the rest of it with one arm. So you're excited about your future.
Yeah.
How are you preparing and self-advocating for aging with a disability? Have you thought about it?
I have. I've actually given that a lot of thought recently. That's my next stage. That's actually, I think we all need to have, if you've got a spinal cord injury, have a wellness plan. And that wellness plan needs to be able to take you into the future. And it's something, again, I've learnt through doing the RAT course, is you do need that. It's not just your daily toolkit. It's a plan. It's a construction plan for the best version of you. And I think that's what I'm working on now. That's where I'm at.
So what are you preparing? So
I am looking at, am I going to be in this same area? And I've decided, yes, I am. This is going to be my forever home. So that's why we moved here. We knew this was going to be a good place for us. There's a lot of really good help here if you know where to look in rural Austinville and Northern Rivers area, basically. So there's a lot of accessibility issues. This is very hilly climate. But there's a lot of flat area too, but there's a lot of help. That's the main reason we came here. We knew this area. We'd been holidaying here for years. We actually have a family holiday home in Woodburn that went under in the flood, sadly. But that's what started me on my journey. This is my first choice of place to come because I knew it. We knew it. We knew the support was good. We'd heard good things about it. So for me now, moving forward, I'm trying to look at those sort of things. Number one, being here, this is going to be my forever home. Building a house that can be accessible from the start. And I think the biggest thing is accepting your condition, accepting that there's things you can do, but also things you can't. Things you need to make those areas the best you can for you.
Yeah, and you've talked about, like, we haven't actually touched on it yet. Northern Rivers region, New South Wales, for people who aren't really aware, about a year and a half ago, 18 months ago, was hit by huge floodwaters, and a lot of people lost their homes and are still displaced now. So I guess as somebody with a disability, thinking about aging, definitely wanting to stay in the Northern, which you should. What are you doing, like, emergency preparedness wise? You want to build an accessible house, but do you also think about what we're going to do in a flood zone? I come from a place that was a huge fire zone. But have you thought about what you're going to do for floods, future floods, fire, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think the local community is taking care of that. They're all being the best advocates they can for themselves. There's groups. There's, interesting enough, just looking at mental health, just that one aspect of COVID has brought out and flood has brought out, is they've started looking at things like people. It's not just the emergency, like the shortfall in SES. There was one man who saved something like 50 people in those floods in Lismore. And I remember at the time hearing reports and things that people who wanted to help were being turned away. So looking at how volunteers can be a better part of the community for help, not just with flood, with everything. Like Lismore-based hospital have a program where you can sign up as a volunteer, you can get your blue card, you can learn how to be help. It's not like you're filling a clinical role, but you're there as ground staff, you're there as support. And I think we need to draw on the community more, because it's an amazing community. They've started things like Safe Haven. They've got 4 places where people who need help can go to feel safe, to get mental, physical, emotional support. And I think there's one in Lismore, Murwillumbah, Woodburn and Mullumbimby, so that they're called Safe Haven. Just the programs like that really make a difference.
I can't stop thinking actually about your transition for not being an advocate to them being an advocate. If you were to speak to somebody who felt like they were very reluctant to want to be a self-advocate because it might be too hard, it might be thinking about all the steps that they might need to take, especially around NDIS. But even then, accessing your community, for example, I mean, there's so many other things you could be self-advocate about. If somebody's reluctant to take that on board, why is it important that people become self-advocates, or what sort of advice would you be giving them?
So I guess for the person who's reluctant, I was very reluctant at the start, so I can relate to that person. So if I was giving advice to the past me, I would try and explain to that person what self-advocacy meant. So part of it is understanding what self-advocacy is. Self-advocacy is having your needs met. I mean, you can look at it from a basic view. It's having your needs met. It's having what you need to be a better version of yourself. But if you're not willing to make that move, it's very hard for that person to move forward. So that's where if you can't, you need to surround yourself with people that can. So it's recognising your desires, your needs, your goals at that first point. So making the start, you need someone to support you in that. And I needed that. I didn't know I needed it at the time, but as things just sort of fell into place for me, but they didn't happen by themselves. So they fell into place because I started making that journey. So if you haven't got that support network around you, you can't move forward. So you need people who understand you, who know what you can be and what your needs are to move forward. So the advice for my past self would be it's not about standing up for yourself wholly. That's not what it's all about, is what I'm trying to say. It's about knowing yourself, knowing that you are the best. You're the best person to understand you. You are your best expert on yourself. So that's what it is. It's starting at that point, moving forward, and then surrounding yourself. Having positive people around you too. I had a friend years ago who was a very negative person, and this was a couple of years ago actually, and I realised through doing all this advocacy that she wasn't a very positive person for me, and that was one of the hardest things I had to do, was move away from her. There were so many things about her that I liked, but there were way more things about her that were not good for me, and I realised I needed to move away, and my husband helped me do that. So knowing what's good for you, knowing what you need, and having the positive support people around you.
Yeah, it is a bit multi-layered, isn't it? Surrounding yourself with the right people. I mean, even though it's universal, cutting off very toxic connections can be almost as bad as an actual relationship breakup.
Absolutely. I just spoke with a fellow, he's actually got autism, who I did a group with, and that was something he said over and over again, was non-toxic people. So, and that was his words, and it's when you said that reminded me of that. There are many people out there that don't have the skills or the courage or whatever that looks like for them to get away from that. And the more peer support groups we have, like with SKIA, with all their groups that they have, the better off people are. It's just recognising that you've got that toxic situation happening that you can get yourself out of that. So it's having that tool set, having those skills, and strategies in place.
What is your strategy? Like, for example, if you were trying to, I don't know, remove yourself from a toxic friendship and you're just finding that you can't seem to remove yourself from it, what's your strategy?
So recently I actually went through this.
Oh, okay. We're talking about real life scenarios then. Okay.
Oh, yeah, we are. Yeah. I actually, it's a scenario where I had a support worker who wasn't good for me anymore. They started off well. Often my husband likes to use the term new broom sweeps clean. So it was great. It was great at the start. Again, a lack of services with COVID meant there weren't enough support workers with my primary support provider, and I went looking for extra hours, and that's where I came across a not so supportive worker who was in the end very toxic for me, and it was scary. Like, it was dead set scary to stand up and look after my own needs. Like, every new situation that comes across, I find can challenge you, and I know I'm not individual out there. I know that's not a unique situation, and it can lead to personal, like, not being safe. Like, I started not feeling safe with her out and about. So for me, it was recognising that. But I knew that. I couldn't see it coming, but I recognised when I was in that crisis situation and needed to make that change. But she was a support worker that had special needs herself in some ways. And so so a part of advocacy is also being an advocate for people around you, something that I've learned. Again, doing the SCARE RAP program has taught me you need to be an advocate for other people as well. Not that you have to take on the world's problems, I don't mean from that viewpoint, but
if you see something that's an injustice, there's something that should be done. Yeah,
and that's what I meant before about that self-advocacy leads to systemic advocacy. It's a built-up effect. So if you recognise in yourself you're needing it, if you can share that on, if you can pay that forward, then our whole community, our whole society looks better. It leads to that systemic advocacy, and that's what I'm realising now. So I had the skills to recognise finally that had arrived, but it was funny how that point for me happened so slowly that I didn't see it coming. But I think I'm hoping now that if that did happen again, I would see it sooner. But at least I recognised that it was there, and I realised that I wasn't feeling safe and well cared for anymore. And I went looking back to my original company if they had more hours, and they did. So I have a wonderful support worker. She's brilliant. She's like everything. She's great.
So I feel like this is really more about courage and taking and making the step to have to feel enough courage to say that you're worth more than what is happening right now.
Yeah, you need to know what your own desires are, and that courage comes from a whole field of things. Again, it's multi-layered. It's like an onion peeling back the layers. To have the courage to do that, you need to know what's wrong in the first place. You need to recognise crisis. You need to see the early warning signals, and that's something, again, I learned through the RAP program, is recognise. I think if I hadn't done that, I might not have seen it when I did, and I might have still been in that wellness trap. So when I say wellness trap, I mean that situation. No, I think it reached a crisis point before I actually was able to do anything about it. And for me, moving forward, as for other people, I'd like to see people be able to recognise that before they're in crisis. So, and that has a big bearing on your mental wellness, not just your physical well-being. There's a whole gamut of effects.
So, before we wrap up for today, we've talked about so many things. We've talked about self-advocacy, going into systemic. We've talked about your journey. We've talked about all this other stuff. And now we're on the path of, like, being courageous to be, one, the best person you want to be, but two, that you feel like you're worth it to even go ahead and do that. Do you have any final thoughts about, anything you want to talk about that we've discussed today, but you're like, I want to let people know that something?
I think overall, if I put it all together, just having that, knowing that you are important, knowing that you are unique and what you need is important, recognising that in yourself, and surrounding, the biggest thing is just having that advocacy around you, having the people that know you, know what the best version of yourself is, so that you can get what you need. You can be the best version of yourself. There's so much help out there. Online and telehealth is just, they're the two biggest tools that you can have. If you've got that connection, you've got a base, you've got a foundation to build from. And looking back, that's what I found was a game changer for me, was having that support base. So support and advocacy and knowledge. They're self-education. They're the three biggest tools that you can have.
If you want any information on anything we've spoken about in this episode, please check the show notes below. And as always, the best thing to do for this podcast is, if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, to please consider giving Have the Nerve a 5-star review and to share it with somebody you know. Thank you for listening.